Okay, so good morning, everyone. Welcome again to the Scaling the Cosmos conference. So today we will have multiple sessions, and I leave Florian and I will co-chair these sessions, and I let just Florian start.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madalena, and welcome to everyone. Thank you very much for being here today with us. So it is a pleasure to welcome you to the second day, but actually the real first day of the conference. And you might notice for this session distinct chronological progression. So, and we just wanted to say that it was not our first intention to do the things on a chronological point of view, but it emerged naturally as a faithful reflection of the specific historical and theoretical orientation brought forward by our speakers, Stéphane Toussaint, Jérémy Kering, Francesco Barreca, and Ruth Noissou will speak this morning. And so we will now start with our first speaker, Stéphane Toussaint. And I am very, very honored to introduce him with a few words, as we are colleagues at the Centre André Chastel in Paris. So Stéphane Toussaint is an alumnus of the École Normale Supérieure Ulm and a research director at the CNRS. He is a philosopher and historian of humanism, specializing in the Italian Renaissance. He currently serves as president of the Société Marsilio Ficino and directs the international journal Academia. His extensive, I must say, bibliography includes numerous monographs, edited volumes, and over 100 articles. So I would notably highlight his most recent books, La Liberté d'Esprit, published in 2019, Contre la pestilence, published in 2021, and Le Songe de Botticelli, published in 2022. And among his articles that are particularly relevant to our discussion, I would mention Ficino, Archimedes and the Celestial Art, published in 2002, and more recently Sangallo, Ghirlandaio, and Ficino, Le Soleil de Santa Trinita, which was about sun symbolism, we speak about many, many times, and also Eros à l'origine de l'art, published in 2022. And he's currently completing a new translation of Marsilio Ficino's Latin treatise of De Amore, which constitutes, I think, the very subject of his talk today. And thank you very much, Stéphane, for being here with us today.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me well? Yes, excuse me for the voice. It is not at its best, unfortunately. Well, I thank you very much, Florian. I do not deserve all these praises, and if it is polite to say so, but I'm very, very glad to be here with you, talking of scaling the sky. I'm afraid, I suppose, that my talk will be a bit of disappointment to the scientifically minded people here in the room, since I'm speaking of philosophy and iconology mostly. First point, a preliminary talk, and all my talk will be only a preliminary talk in order to introduce Jérémy's brilliant speech. Ficino is a very interesting character for the precise reason that he was aware of the double meaning of scaling. Scaling in English has a double meaning. To scale, to measure, and we heard yesterday the very precise sense of measuring the sky from the Earth, from the horizon of the Earth, looking upwards to the motion of the planets. But there is a second meaning, which is climbing. You scale a wall. You climb a wall. And if I may say so, this is l'angle mort of this program, the blind spots of this conference, perhaps. And Ficino is precisely very interesting, since it was completely aware of the double meaning of scaling as measuring the sky and ascending the sky. And the first text, which we have here, is a text from the Platonic Theology, 1482. And you have in the margin of my text, left and right, two arrows indicating the very important concept in this passage. So, Marsilio Ficino was very, very keen on astrology, as you know well, and he was also very keen on astronomy. As a matter of fact, we have here in this museum the planetary clock of Della Volpaia, and in these circumstances, I had the opportunity to study this planetary clock more than 25 years ago, I suppose. Time goes by, and it was lingering in my mind when I was studying this planetary clock that there was some connection with Ficino, and in fact there is. I will not dwell on the planetary clock, since we have here Giorgio Strano, who will explain everything about the clock, I suppose around 12 or 1 o'clock. But it is a very important technical device which is linked to Ficino's philosophy, going back to the Platonic theology. In the Platonic theology, Ficino explained that geniuses, may it be Daedalus or Orpheus or Hermes Trismegistus or Archimedes, had the possibility to experience the vacatio animae, which is a kind of abstraction and of a fly ascension to the sky. This is the reason why he says, speaking of the artifacts created by geniuses, these artifacts one can observe, oh, man uses all the world's materials and uses them everywhere as though they were all subject to him. And the material are not only the artificial material. We shall see that he is also dealing with natural material and also with cosmic matter. Going on, he says that man tramples on the earth, furrows the water, ascends into the air in the tallest towers, and I am leaving aside the wings of Daedalus and Icarus, the first glimpse, the first hint to the flying mind upwards to the sky. He kindled fire, and he alone uses and delights especially in the familial hearth, in justice, only a celestial animal. This is the right definition of man for Ficino. A celestial animal delights in the celestial element with heavenly power. He ascends and measures the heaven. Ascending and measuring, the double meaning of to scale that we have precisely here. Second excerpt from the Theologia Platonica, book 13, chapter 3. Here speaking precisely of Archimedes and the planetary sphere of Archimedes, which has a long, long story. Interesting here is the fact that measuring the cosmos is a way of recreating the sky. But you can measure the cosmos once you have ascended the cosmos, a double meaning of scaling here again. So, here speaking of the subtle computing of numbers, the meticulous describing of geometrical figures, the obscurest motion of astronomical lines, the exacting consonance of music, the daily observation of the stars, all practical attitude, which are linked to the measurement of the sky, of course. The investigation into things of long duration, the eloquence of the orator, and so on. So you have here the precise definition which encapsulates Ficino's conception of measuring nature. Going on, is speaking of Archimedes. Archimedes epitomizes the idea of the genius measuring the sky, for nobody would be able to discern how Archimedes put the bronze spheres together and gave them motion like the heavenly motions unless it were endowed with a like genius. Close connection between the abstract mind of Archimedes, who's able to ascend the sky and then to measure the planetary motion and to reproduce planetary motion in a planetary device. This planetary device, because in the work of Ficino, when we are looking through at least three texts. This text of the Theologia Platonica, the De Vita of 1489, and a very famous letter to the astronomer Paul of Middelburg in 1492, Ficino was very keen on what he called the Machina Florentina. And the Machina Florentina for him was the symbol of the golden age under Lorenzo de' Medici. And the Machina Florentina is precisely the clock of Della Volpaia. Della Volpaia was closely connected not only to Leonardo da Vinci. It was Lorenzo della Volpaia was actually the true genius, much more than Leonardo. Leonardo had no real technical skill. He had many ideas. He fetched up many ideas, and he put them together in his drawing. But the true craftsman, the true genius, practical genius, was Lorenzo della Volpaia. And between 1482 and the very beginning of the 16th century, Lorenzo had two planetary clocks built in Florence. And Ficino, as a matter of fact, is speaking of these two clocks. The first clock in 1482 in the Theologia Platonica, and the second clock, the idea at least of the second clock, in the De Vita, with the two spheres. The first clock was only a flat dial, which is very well described by Poliziano in a letter to Della Casa, written in 1482. The second clock was not only a flat dial, but as you see, a dial on a column and the two spheres of the cosmos and of the Earth. In the De Vita, Ficino is precisely describing such a device as a talismanic device which enables the human mind, to ascend the sky. Only contemplating the machine, you have the true connection with the motion of the planets. It is an inner experience and a philosophical experience, if you may say so. A detail here. It is in one of the manuscripts. The notebooks of the Della Volpaia, father and son, are here, conserved here. And I suppose it would be time to have a critical edition of it. Pedretti studied the notebooks, but we have to really to take the task of editing it and commenting it. And this is one of the sketch of the cosmos. with, as you see, the meridiano, which linked the two poles, and then you have the horizon in diagonal, and then the zodiac, the other diagonal. It is a very sketchy idea of the cosmos. And this is precisely the idea of Ficino in 1489. This is a very standard image of the cosmos. If you see here, the cover page from Proclus de Sphera, which was edited by Thomas Linacre. Thomas Linacre was a physician and a humanist. Actually, he founded the College of Physicians at the very beginning of the 16th century in London, and he translated Proclus de Sphera. And you have precisely the same image of the cosmos as we have here, very sketchy one, in the De La Volpaia clock. The Earth at the very middle, the belt of the zodiac, the meridianus, and then the two tropic, Cancer, Capricorn, and the equator and the horizon in diagonal. And this is a typical standard image that epitomizes the concept of cosmos, the Greco-Roman concept of cosmos. But I say that there is not only the meaning of measuring the sky, but also the meaning of ascending the sky. And here we enter the De Amore. Logically, my talk is unfolding in two parts. We had the first part on measuring the sky, and now we have the second part on loving the cosmos in order to ascend it. What does it mean, scaling, climbing the sky in the De Amore? The De Amore is the first text of Ficino in 1469. And there is a revision of the text in 1484, which is exactly at the same time of the Theologia Platonica. So it is absolutely legitimate to study the two texts in parallel. Climbing the sky is an old idea which goes back to Aristophanes' fabula of the androgynes. Perhaps you know that in the Symposium, Plato explains the first origin of mankind. Mankind was composed of actually two spheric creatures, which were male and male, women and women, and male and women. There were three spheres. And Ficino is very keen on this mythology, and he is explaining the very motive for which Zeus decided to divide those primitive creatures in two parts. And this is our text. This is my edition and my translation in Italian. So I have no, unfortunately, I have no English translation of it, but it is quite easy to understand. So if you know Latin. Masculinum genus sole genitus erat, feminum terra luna promiscum. So the masculine androgyne was linked to the sun. The feminine androgyne was linked to the earth, and the properly androgyne was linked to the moon. And they were very strong creatures, and they decided to conquer the Olympus. Quare cundis pugnare tentabant, et in celum ascendere, which is precisely the translation of the Greek of Plato, which you have here the quotation in Greek, tois ton uranon anabasin epikeiren poin. Ton uranon anabasin. It is to scale the sky. The second meaning, which is very important in Ficino's theory of cosmos, because you can only reproduce the sky, imitate the sky, recreate the sky with artificial materials once you have the possibility to ascend mentally the sky through love. There is here the central tenet of cosmic love, which is very important in Ficino. And obviously, you shall object that it is quite the opposite of technical astronomy and quite the opposite of a rational idea of the cosmos. In fact, and it is very difficult for us to conceive that in the same mind and at the same time, let's say, at the end of the 15th century, at the beginning of the 16th century, humanists and philosophers like Ficino or craftsmen like Lorenzo della Volpaia were combining the two dimensions of loving and measuring. But it is called affectus and aspectus. Affectus is the fact that naturally man is loving cosmos, but also naturally measuring cosmos. There is absolutely no antagonism between the two attitudes. Is it possible to have a representation of love in the cosmos and of the ascension of the loving mind in the cosmos? Yes, it is possible to find such type of image. But first of all, we have to conceive how it is possible that love is a creator and a servator mundi. It is a central, a very central idea. It is essential to understand all the Machina Mundi of Ficino. Here we have a second excerpt of the De Amore, and I underlined for you in Latin the very important tenet. Amor in omnibus ad omnia, creator omnius, magister omnius. Omnium. What does it mean? It means that love is actually the demiurge of the cosmos. Love is extracting cosmos from chaos and organizing all the motion of the planets and combining the four elements. This is precisely the meaning of the second excerpt in Righini. Terre ursus aquae et aeris partes invicem et in quali libet animalium specie, eius dem specie animalia sese mutua consuetudine semper acciscunt. So, love is so extended a power of organization that the same element, the four elements, earth, water, fire, air, are moved by love in order to combine cosmos in the cosmic order. This is the reason why love is said the effector atque servator. The clue was to find an iconological representation of this very peculiar way of seeing the cosmos through love. And here, in the Amorum Emblemata of Otto van Veen, 1608, you have the precise representation of Ficinian love as cosmical savior and watcher. It is an emblemata amorum of Van Veen. Venus was a very important artist and humanist. He was the master of Rubens, for example, and he was very keen on Italian culture, and he was in Italy in 1575, if I'm right. And here he decided to represent cosmic love, but not only cosmic love, love as cosmical organizer. In the margin on your left, you have Latin and French and Netherlandish commentary on the love in the cosmos. What is very interesting is the very terms amour partout, par amour tout, tout par amour, par tout amour. Amor in omnibus ad omnia creator omnium magister omnium, effector est atque servator. Amor conservat cuncta cupido. So love is conserving and creating everything, which is an old idea of Empedocles, obviously, which was taken up by Plato in his Timaeus. Nec nicellum ac mundi totius machina mundi, which is the key concept in Ficino and after Ficino also in Della Volpaia. If I remember well, but perhaps Giorgio will confirm or infirm my memory, in the notebooks of Lorenzo della Volpaia, we have the very idea of imitazione del cielo. And this is a typical Ficinian idea. So the machina mundi is actually created by love itself. Concordi unitac pace ligata. The elements are bound together through love and through vinculis, desmoi in Greek. This, for the commentary, no, the image is very interesting because, as you see, you have love ascending above the sky and is just arrowing the cosmos, which is the standard image of the cosmos we had here, exactly the same. The very same idea of the cosmos with the zodiacus, the equator, and so on. And if you pay attention to the arrows, you see that we have 5 of them. Why 5? Because they are the 5 elements in the Aristotelian physics. Air, earth, fire, water, and the quintessence. This is the reason why we have 5 arrows. And they stick in the cosmos from part to part, spiking through the sphere with the center, at the center, the earth. And this is the true representation of the machine, the cosmical machine of Ficino, bound together through the arrow of love. I suppose time is limited, so I hope that you were pleased by this tour through the sky. I warn you against the arrow of love, and I thank you very much.
So thank you, Stefan, for this wonderful first talk. Now I will call Jeremy Kering to join us. So it is also my pleasure to introduce Jeremy, who is professor of early modern art history at the University of Fribourg, Switzerland. His field of study are Renaissance art, epistemology and of art history, and anthropology of images. He has published Le Prince en représentation in 2013, Caravage, Juste un détail in 2018, and co-edited with Stephen Campbell and Andrea Mantegna, Making Art History, published in 2015, and also with Yves Limbois, Demis Shapiro, a special issue of the journal October. He has edited 2 unpublished manuscripts by Robert Klein, Esthétique de la Techné, published in 2017, and Essai sur la responsabilité, published in 2022. And more recently, he has published Iconophages, an history of ingesting images, published in 2001 in French, and in 2024, last year, in English with Zone Books, for which he was also awarded by the Pinot Collection Prize. Recently, he has published Enquête sur les Ménines, Velázquez et le regard du roi, published this year, and co-edited also with Alessandro Nova and Alina Payne, Robert Klein, Meteor in Art History and Philosophy. And he will speak today about Mantua. He will speak today about Mantua on this talk entitled Scaling the Future, an Astromantic Sky in Mantua. Thank you again, Jeremy.
Thank you, Florian. I shall begin with a word of regret. I should really have called this talk Back to the Future, not, I might add, in reference to Robert Zemeckis' film, but for a different, more personal reason. The painted representation I shall be discussing today, the ceiling of the Camera dello Zodiaco, is part of a palatial ensemble that I spent a great deal of time with more than 25 years ago, as I was writing my dissertation on the Palazzo Ducale di Mantova. Now, in contrast to the other frescoes analyzed in my dissertation, I decided against including the Camera dello Zodiaco in the published version of it. I felt that I was missing something about it, and I resolved at the time to give it further attention in the more or less near future. Fortunately, things have worked out, and as it does often happen, the future has become the present. That future that I was vaguely foreseeing 25 years ago is here now at last, and I cannot imagine a better occasion for returning to this astrological decorative work than the one that brings us all together today. For arranging this wonderful opportunity, I would like to warmly thank the organizers, or to use André Chastel's terminology, the conference Mundiculteur, Maddalena Napoletani and Florian Métral, and especially for having me follow my dear colleague and friend Stéphane Toussaint, who I hope will not hesitate to let me know if I stray from my journey through the night sky. Let us look, therefore, at this sky. More exactly, let us look at its scaling on the vaulted ceiling of the vaulting ceiling of the Camera dello Zodiaco, the main room in the apartment of the Duke Guglielmo Gonzaga in the Corte Vecchia. Painted by the artist Lorenzo Costa il Giovane between 1579 and 1580, the work shows us a portion of the sky that includes parts of both the northern and southern hemispheres. As we can determine from the three lines that intersect at the sign of Virgo, the ecliptic, the local meridian, and the equator, this portion corresponds to the observable night sky in Mantua at the end of spring or fall, from the 16th century up to the beginning of the 17th century. To be more precise, this sky includes several constellations, the golden stars giving shape of the celestial figures deriving from Greco-Roman culture, forms that were fixed, among others, by Albrecht Dürer at the very beginning of the 16th century. You can see that the zodiac signs, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, and finally Scorpio, and also constellations that are not part of the zodiac, the Big Dipper, Draco, Hercules, Ophiuchus, Anguilla, and so on. In the center of this astrological ensemble, and more exactly on the back of the Virgin, Lorenzo Costa has depicted Diana on a chariot. The goddess personifies the moon, as we can see from the crescent on her head. She holds the reins in her left hand, and she grasps an arrow in her right hand. Quite unusually, a chariot is pulled by dogs. In several visual aspects, the fresco is close to the astrological vault of the Sagrestia Vecchia of San Lorenzo here. We should note, however, a fundamental difference. While the vaulted ceiling in Florence shows the sky as seen from the earth, from below, the one in the Ducal Palace in Mantua represents a portion of the sky as seen from the Empyrean, from above. In order to fully understand the choice of such a depiction of the sky, we must look at the surviving documents connected with the production. Thanks to letters composed by Teodoro San Giorgio, the Duke's secretary and advisor in charge of renovation and construction projects within the palace, it is possible for us to appreciate the planning that went into the decoration and to follow the progress of the work from the summer of 1579 to the fall of 1580. as we can see from a letter addressed to Guglielmo Gonzaga, dated August 28, 1579, San Giorgio was giving instructions to the artist Lorenzo Costa. On the basis of those instructions, the artist was working on a cartoon that would eventually be transferred to the vaulted ceiling. On the following day, the 29th, San Giorgio mentions a discussion with the painter about payment. Since the work involved highly detailed and precise measurements, Costa had complained that he was not being paid well enough. Thanks to this same exchange of letters, we know that Costa worked on the cartoon up until the end of September, before allowing San Giorgio to check the work, and after which San Giorgio suggested a few corrections. Finally, in November 1579, the ducal advisor writes to Tintoretto, by the intermediary of Paolo Moro, asking the Venetian painter to produce a frieze representing dogs, cani and puttini, playing together, and sending him a drawing showing the motif. San Giorgio points out also that one of the putti must hold in his hand a plaque, targa, in which they will be able to place a real clock, la sfera de orologio. This part of the decoration is no longer in its place. The frieze, however, is not lost, and you have it part below. It is conserved today in the Sala del Crociolo, and this frieze shows that San Giorgio's instructions were carried out, since we can discern, even badly here, vegetal arabesques, in which we see dogs and putti interacting. Despite its ornamental aspect, the frieze is thematically tied to the main painting by a certain number of details. First of all, the dogs clearly recall the hunting dogs that are pulling Diana's chariots. Next, the arrows that are held by the putti resemble the one brandished by the goddess. One of the putti on the frieze is raising a shield on which we can see a face crowned with a crescent moon. And finally, a putto is holding a plaque that contains a circular frame intended to house a clock. Let us note, and I shall come back to this later, how much San Giorgio's letters indicate his continuous checking of the decoration's production. Whether it is a matter of the astronomical measurements to be reproduced, the figures to be included in the frieze, and the items that had to go along with them, everything leads us to believe that this was a work of decoration that was thoroughly thought out according to a pre-existing plan, and for which nothing was left to chance. This attention to right form is perhaps sufficiently interesting to demand some analysis. So let us try to interpret it, but not without first recalling the main points of the interpretation proposed in 1988 by Tiziana Bacco, since this is the one that is generally accepted by the specialists. Bacco's interpretation takes the astrological aspect of the vault seriously. After directing our attention to the position of the moon, exactly at the intersection of the local meridian, the equator, and the ecliptic, and also to the zodiac signs and the constellations that are outside of the zodiac, she compares the scene on the vaulted ceiling with the night sky in Mantua, such as it could have been seen from between the time of Guglielmo's birth in 1538 and 1579, the year in which the decoration work was undertaken. Assuming that the painting commemorated in an astrological way some important event that took place during the reign of Guglielmo, she compares several important dates in the Duke's life with the configuration in the painting. April 24, 1550, Guglielmo's coronation as third Duke of Mantua. April 26, 1561, the entrance into Mantua of Eleonora of Austria. Or September 21, 1562, the birth of Vincenzo I Gonzaga, etc., etc. Now, only one of these dates corresponds exactly to the night sky as we see it, including the passing of the moon through Spica in Virgo, and this is the date of the entry of Guglielmo's wife, Eleonora of Austria, into Mantua, April 26, 1561. As Bacco sees it, The painted decoration is a commemoration of Guglielmo's marriage and of the strategic rapprochement of the Gonzaga family with the Habsburg Empire. This theory finds strong support in the fact that Diana, moon, through her attributes, appears in a function as protectress of marriage. Although here I have to say that the successive restorations of this part of the ceiling prevent us from drawing any certain conclusions about how it originally looked. The moon in Virgo, more precisely the moon passing close by Spica in Virgo, as we see it in the decoration, is generally interpreted as propitious for marriage and fertility. In his De Occulta, Agrippa explains that this 14th house of the moon favors, among other things, love between spouses. At first glance, Bacon's astrological reading seems well-founded. Yet, as convincing as it may appear, a reading does have its problems. The ceiling was painted almost 20 years after Eleonora's entry into Mantua, and this seems quite a big distance in time. Furthermore, in 1579, the question of lineage was no longer really current, given that Vincenzo, the Duke's firstborn son, was in fine health, and thus the fate of the destiny of dynasty seemed assured. So we might ask ourselves, why celebrate something so outdated? And if it really was a commemorative work, how do we account for the choice of astrology? Outside of the astrologers themselves, we would have been able to see Eleonora's entry in Mantua in such an astrological configuration. In reality, the term commemoration seems not enough in itself to define the painted ceiling. As I pointed out earlier, to account for the astral configuration on the ceiling, Bacon looked for dates where the appearance of the night sky would match it. However, convinced as she was that this was a commemorative work, she only looked for dates that came before the creation of the painted ceiling. But is it not the case that if the depiction of a night sky can reproduce a view of the sky from the past, it can also depict one that is to come? As was shown by Giorgio Buonvino, the astronomer that Bacon consulted for an investigation, the night sky depicted in the Mantua ceiling corresponds to one that would have been visible in Mantua between the years 1530 and 1620 at the spring and autumnal equinoxes. In other words, since this is a representation that touches upon time and the influence of the stars on human affairs, why should this decoration not be both a reactivation of a past configuration and the prefiguration of an astral arrangement to come? Why not, therefore, see it as a sort of talisman, an image capable of capturing and then transmitting the influx of positive celestial energy on certain dates? Philippe Morel, in his 1991 study of the Chamber of the Muses at the Villa Medici in Rome, notes that in 1583, Cardinal Ferdinand of Medici commissioned the painter Jacopo Zucchi to produce a decorative work designed to have just such a talismanic function. Could not Guglielmo have done the same 3 years earlier? It is, of course, impossible to prove the existence of such a talisman in Mantua for the very good reason that no document would dare mention the talismanic nature of a painting placed in a princely palace. On the other hand, it is possible to determine whether or not it could have existed. The historical and cultural conditions underlying the appearance of similar talismans have been studied in detail, and I refer you again to Philippe Morel's work in this regard. For our purposes, it will suffice to note that Duke Guglielmo often consulted astrologers, among whom we can include Giovanni Paolo Donati, who drew up several horoscopes for him in 1580, or Giuseppe Moletti da Messina, here, who dedicated to him his almanacs and prognostications for the years 1564-1584. We should also note that right under the nose of the Inquisition, Guglielmo maintained regular contact with certain magic doctors, Cesalpino, Condrocchi, Collorno, and he had many works of magic in his personal library. Still, although it may be difficult to attribute with any certainty a talismanic function to a painting work of art, we have only to open Marsilio Ficino's De Vita, the book that was famous and that received much commentary in the 16th century, to see that a similar artifact was not inconceivable in the Renaissance. In chapter 19 of book 3, the doctor and philosopher advises anyone who wants to attract to themselves the benefits of the heavens to observe the movement of the spheres with a view to its artificial replica in the form of an astronomical clock, and still further to produce a talisman painted on the ceiling of the chamber. And I quote, "The astrologers judge it useful to look at these particular colors above all, in order to capture the gifts of the celestial graces, and in the model of the world which you are making, to insert the blue color of the world in the spheres. They think it worthwhile to add to the spheres, for a true imitation of the heavens, golden stars, and to close Vesta herself, or Ceres, that is the earth. The adherent of those things should either carry about with him a model of this kind, or should place it opposite him and gaze at it. But it will be useful to look at a sphere equipped with its own motions. Archimedes once constructed one, and a Florentine friend of ours named Lorenzo did so just recently. Nor should one simply look at it, but reflect upon it in the mind. Therefore, in the very depth of his house, he should construct a chamber, cubiculum, vaulted and marked with these figures and colors, and he should spend most of his waking hours there and also sleep." End quote. Carried out with all due respect for art, the painted image is able to capture the celestial influxes, the rays of the stars through which the world spirit acts. The question is thus the following: is our astrological painting similar to what Ficino is describing? If it is, then, does it respect the conditions necessary for it to function as a talisman? To reply to this question, let us proceed step by step. Consider first the principle of similarity, similitudo, that underlies its existence and its functioning. Any talismanic image must be the simulacrum of celestial powers whose influxes it must pick up. There must be a resemblance between the night sky and its painted double in order for any resonance between the two to be produced, a transmission of influx. Since we can say with certainty that San Giorgio supervised Lorenzo Costa's work with a high degree of attention, closely considering the placement of each star, we must allow that the principle of resemblance was at the very least respected, and that San Giorgio was trying to adhere to it. We can see, moreover, that the same respect was accorded as far as concerned the colors mentioned by Ficino. As the latter recalls, when one wants to make a figure of the world, in order to receive the gifts of the heavens, it is important to use the three colors: blue for the sky, green for Venus and the moon, and gold for the stars. Now, in fact, these three colors are present in the vaulted ceiling. Another features of the painted ceiling that goes along with this logic of similarity is the following. We should remember that the portion of the sky that is depicted on the vaulted ceiling is seen from above and not from the ground below. This reversed representation was surely done so as to facilitate an effect of specular reflection between the sky itself and the painting, thus allowing the celestial bodies to better enter into emulatio, and therefore into resonance with their image. Ficino's second condition under which a talisman must be made is that it has to be constructed at the very moment when the astral configuration that is to be reproduced actually occurs. This is the main area of difficulty for the present case. The painting could not possibly have been done during the period of time in which the stars remained in the position to be copied. And yet, the requirement was not really that strict. The decoration could be activated at a later date. As Eugenio Garin notes in his 1976 study, Lo Zodiaco della Vita, a number of writers mention perpetual talismans, that is, ones that are able to be charged with energy each time that the stars realign in a certain way. What counts, therefore, is the presence of the talisman at the precise time when the stars and the representation match, when the celestial spirit recognizes its form on Earth and sends its power through that form. The celestial powers are in this way caught by the simulacrum that imitates them, and they exert their force through the intermediary of the spirit. We should note that this idea of a diffusion of force through the intermediary of the spirit is actually figured in the decoration. As we have mentioned, the frieze was supposed to include dogs and puttini, with the latter holding the arrows of Diana. San Giorgio is very insistent about this. Now, if we consider the tradition according to which putti were linked to spirits or spiritelli, it is entirely possible that San Giorgio was intending to have the puttini figuratively represent the transmission of the spirits of the celestial spirits. Diana's arrows would thus represent a particular type of virtutes that was sent down to her from the heavens. There is one last aspect that we should mention here, and it is not the least important. In the De Vita, the painted ceiling that Ficino mentions involved a scaling of the sky that included the production and use of a mechanical astronomical clock capable of reproducing the internal movement of the sky. Well, the presence of a clock in the Camera dello Zodiaco frieze is particularly telling. As we have seen, San Giorgio gave clear instructions to Tintoretto that a sfera de orologio was absolutely to be included in the decoration. We have no idea what this clock looked like, but it is not impossible that it was an astronomical clock. Documents that mention difficulties with making the clock work might well incline us to think it was. Furthermore, the term that San Giorgio uses, namely sfera, is also the one used to refer to Lorenzo della Volpaia's clock. In any event, it was quite unusual for such an instrument of measurement to be included in a painted work of decoration at that time. The only other known example within the Ducal Palace of Mantua is the clock in the Loggia dei Marmi, a very simple clock. But what could such a clock have been used for? And if we go back to Ficino's De Vita as possible answer images. As we saw in the extract cited earlier, the doctor-philosopher instructs anyone who wishes to impregnate themselves with the celestial powers to observe an astronomical clock so that the figure of the world might be imprinted on their mind and animates their spirits. As Stéphane Toussaint points out in his essay Ficino, Archimedes and the Celestial Arts, the clock, and I quote, the clock in a sense offered both instrument and rapture as a miniaturized model of the animated sky, and thus provided a highly favorable vehicle for the ecstatic contemplation of the world soul. End quote. The clock could, of course, have served a practical astrological purpose, allowing the Duke and those close to him to know the precise times of the moon's passing. But if we are to believe Ficino's text, the sfera would have equally well allowed him to tap into the celestial influxes and to interiorize the cosmic movements necessary for the magic to work. In conclusion, I would like to ponder one more question. If indeed there was this talismanic aspect to the painting, why would Guglielmo have commissioned it? Any answers here must be speculative, since we have no documentary evidence. But we can say that his health was fragile. He was obese, kyphotic, suffering from rickets, chronic malaria, and gout. His poor health may well have led him to seek solace or hope in magical practices. Most books of magic available at the time, including Ficino's De Vita, contain formulae or spells procuring this source of fields. Referring to Picatrix, Ficino explains that a lunar talisman made in the 17th degree of Virgo can cure all manner of illnesses. Agrippa says something similar about the 14th house of the moon. A talisman made at the time of this house cures the sick, he writes. There is nothing to prove that the painting ceiling of the Camera del Zodiaco was used as a talisman. However, since so many doctors and philosophers had devoted themselves to the search for the connection between microcosm and macrocosm, it is entirely possible that such ideas produced dreams of magic in a man like Guglielmo, who was fascinated by the celestial powers. So it is conceivable that the painted decoration was endowed with two functions, commemorative and talismanic. The first function, aligning the Duke's reign with the order of the cosmos and making the prince more generally the guarantor of the regularity of the universe on Earth, was a pretext serving to hide the scandalous nature of the second, allowing Guglielmo access to the celestial powers without fear of the Inquisition. Reducing a section of the sky to the size of a bedchamber transformed the image into an operator. An operator, thanks to which, in the eyes of the Duke of Mantua, the future might have appeared in a more reassuring light. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jérémy. I'm going to ask to Stéphane also to join us for the discussion. We're going to open the discussion. I don't know if there is some pressing question from the audience, but I can just say a few words to start. That was very interesting to hear both of us, because you speak of this close link between cosmos, clocks, instrument as a way of seeing and scaling the cosmos. And also thank you, Stéphane, for pointing out the blind spot. It's always good when the blind spot is spotted at the very beginning of a conference, but I really love the idea of the ascending as a process to understand the cosmos. And I have a very general question, but yesterday during the visit also Giorgio Strano speaks about the way you represent the cosmos from below, from the earth, and also, I mean, from the top of the universe. And how do you make eventually the link with the enterprise of the cosmography? Because there is also this very idea in many cosmographers that to understand the cosmos, you need to represent it from above. Whether if you represent from the earth, it's more linked to an astrological point of view. And when you represent from above, it's more about the knowledge, how things works. And how do you think about this?
This is a question for me.
This is a general question.
This is a very old problem, you know. The fact that, and it goes back to the 12th century history of astronomy. If I remember well, already Robert Grostet, in his commentary on the Genesis, had this point in mind when he said that the astronomy has to be very accurate so as to make astrology works. Astrology is working well when astronomy is very accurate. And it is the reason why I insisted on the two aspects of affect and aspect. The global view of the cosmos needs accuracy, and this is the reason why we have the planetary clock of the level Bayer. The only precedent example is the Dondi clock at Padua. But between the two, you have an extended time they had an extended time to study and to measure accurately and to, let's say, translate the measuring of the cosmos into a mechanical device, which is a very technical problem that we have also in your talk. But all this, in the Ficinian perspective and in the perspective of astronomer, astrologer of the 15th century, beginning of the 16th century, is the proof that astrology and astronomy are closely connected. Whereas in other contexts they are conflicting. Here they are connected. And the two approach from above and from the horizon of the Earth is the reason why we have to combine the two. You have this perfect complementarity between the two aspects. I don't know if this was the meaning of your question.
Yeah, sure.
Nothing to add.
So, is there any question from the audience? Yes.
It is unusual for astronomical representation, astrological representation. Yes, I don't really have an answer for this, for the introduction of dogs here. Maybe you have one. The relation between arrows, hunting, of course, is obvious, but can we use it as a sign or a symptom of a talismanic dimension, or a more philosophical relation to the idea of the relation between sky and earth, and maybe also love. Having this, this.
Dogs are linked to Diana.
Of course, but in
the problem is that, as you pointed out, the fresco was decaying. Heavily restored in this precise part.
You see the, I don't know if you see it. I've tried to, I don't have a pointer, but you have here the mark of the center part of the ceiling. If this part was highly renovated, but we see that the head of the dog is outside this part. Normally, this iconographic part.
I see nothing strange in associating dogs and lions. I suppose it is absolutely logical to have two emblems, lion and choose hunting.
Choose hunting, of course.
Presenting vehicles.
And we know that dogs were very important for the Gonzaga family, and we have a lot of right. So it could be a connection between the topical dimension of the representation and the astrological dimension.
I'll give you the microphone.
Oh, yeah. There is a microphone.
Thank you. I have a very naive question for Professor Curring. I was wondering do we have any accounts about contemporaries or later visitors who saw the world? We don't.
No.
Okay, I was curious about that.
Well, we have some notes about the palace, but during the 18th century, not during the
18th century, yeah?
Very
Okay, so later visitors. Okay, thank you.
You mean for this decoration, right? Not for about this decoration. No, we don't have. No. We don't.
Yes, thank you very much for both presentations. It's another a question about the depiction of constellation in itself. You showed us the Pezzellino celestial vault in San Lorenzo, in the Sacristia Vecchia, and I find very striking the fact that such constellations are in like a gray and blue camailleux, and the other one in Mantua are in fact in relief and colored, with skin colored for most of the figures. And I was wondering if this kind of the fact that the constellations are put in relief by color has an importance, has a significant function in the way to deliver the talismanic message, or not at all?
Can have the bodily aspects is more relevant with this use of color, of course, but it's the norm in other decoration, in other palace. If you think about the Caprarola, you have quite the same representation with yes, the presence of the constellation, the figures that embodied the constellations are like this. So I don't think it is something that we can use to found the talismanic function of the representation.
Might be visual more than iconographical or iconological.
I do understand, but because it is completely normal at the time, it's difficult to make it significant for the talismanic function.
I appreciated your point about commemoration in the analysis of astral vaults. I think commemoration is completely outside the mindset of astrology in the Renaissance. When one has to analyze something like this vault, you should take into account the astrological theories in detail. And I think a general term like commemoration, it's not useful. And I appreciate this point. In fact, for example, many scholars use this kind of mindset even in the past to analyze such works, and they were usually out of the right path, in my idea. For example, the Sacristia Vecchia vault was in the mind of Warburg a commemoration of the inauguration of the main altar in the chapel. But I think this is not a good way to explore the meaning of the astrological meaning of the vault. My idea is that in this case you have something related to the past, but it's not a commemoration. It's a vault connected to an astrological operation of election, or maybe also an interrogation. So this is the typical mindset of astrology in the Renaissance. I think when examining such works, you have to enter that mindset. Thanks.
Thank you also from me for both your presentations. I have a question for Stefan. And this is obviously a very naive question coming from someone who's not working on the early modern period, but I was wondering whether you could like elaborate a little bit more on the concept of love at the time? Like, is this just a mere metaphor for this, like trying to explain the like invisible forces, or is there like a certain framework, let's say in terms of physics, like a physical idea of love and the like effects of love, or like mechanics of love or something?
All together.
Sorry.
Altogether, because it is certainly not metaphorical for Ficino, and it is certainly not metaphorical for the philosopher of the early modern. I prefer to speak of Renaissance. The early modern is too vague for my taste, but the very idea finds its very roots in the Timaeus. Plato say that there is a kind of philia between the four elements. And it is a very known and commented passage of the Timaeus of Plato. And already, and during the Middle Ages, in Chalcidius, for example, you have this very idea that love is connecting all the parts of the universe. And it is absolutely not a poetical view. They had in mind that there was a loving force, philia, working in the cosmos. So when Ficino is commenting on Timaeus and love, obviously is connecting not only to Plato, not only to Proclus, to Chalcidius, but also to Proclus, the Sphera of Proclus. And as a matter of fact, Proclus is a key figure to understand the cosmic idea of love, because Proclus, and we are in the late period of Neoplatonism, after Plotinus, Proclus had all the sources in mind when he was speaking of cosmic love. For example, in his commentary on the first Alcibiades, Proclus explained that love is also a magical force, action in distance. And he quotes about this precise point the very obscure Chaldean oracles. Peribrutes eros, the love which is connecting the cosmos through the bounds of fire, through fiery bounds. It is certainly very difficult for a scientifically modern mind to understand this frame of this mentality. But at that time, it was really important to connect all this aspect of love with the cosmic machine, because one of the driving force of the influence in astrology is, and Ficino is precisely on this side of the problem, is the cosmic force of love. You connect through admiration of the Machina Mundi. And this is the reason why Ficino in his De Amore is dwelling so much on cosmic love, because he has in mind what you find in Plato, which is the Scala Amoris. The Scala Amoris is leading you from the earth to the sky. I hope that, but we could have a talk for hours and hours on this problem. It is a very important problem. It seems poetry, just metaphorical ideas, but they are very important at that time.
Also because it's connected to medicine.
If I just think of love as attraction of masses, and you just replace it by gravitational attraction rather than body's attraction, this is very close to the modern view. And this is permeating, the cosmos is permeating with fields, which have funny names.
Yes.
That we don't understand in real. So, of course, we don't have a single field in common physics. But still, I resonate with this, that there are some forces that permeate the universe and organize it. And call it love, call it attraction.
Yeah.
So, it's just a naive
yes.
reaction. But
Yes. No, you're right. When Giorgio yesterday told a very interesting thing, the magnet was the only, the strong, was in the action in distance. And precisely, Ficino says, if you want to understand love, just think of the magnet.
Maybe one more.
One last question.
Thank you. I would like to thank you both for your very interesting presentation. And I have one simple question for Stefan. It's still about Ficino. How was received the Ficino cosmography at this time?
At this time, you mean in the Renaissance?
Yes, exactly. Because we are talking about the love as a demiurge. So I was wondering what was the reception of this text?
Well, the demiurgic aspect of cosmic love in Ficino had a huge influence up to Giordano Bruno and after. And you find precisely in some, but not only in the iconological example I gave you of Otto Venus, which is very late, within 1608, but this precise emblemata amorum had a huge influence up to the very beginning of the 18th century. As to the cosmographical idea of capturing the forces of love, for example, we find very interesting ideas in Gallucci, who is a Venetian humanist, and Gallucci had the idea of a paper talismanic device that you can carry in your journey in order to reset yourself with the world soul. And it is only a paper device. You know? It says, well, it is very, Gallucci say, I remind you the De Vita. And Ficino say that, yeah, you should have in your home sort of chapel with configuration of the sky and possibly also a planetary clock, but obviously it is not possible for everybody to carry it. And so when you are riding on your horse, you can have talismanic paper in your book and you can reset yourself with. Just an example of the huge influence of Ficino's cosmography in the Renaissance.
Thank you.
I would like to thank both of our speakers for their fascinating presentations that were, I think, a wonderful opening for our conference. And now I'm going to invite you all to the coffee break, which is just over there, and we will resume in 15 minutes. Okay? Thank you. Okay, so we will resume with the second part of the session, Modern Era 1. Florian will moderate the session. I would like to remember to all the speakers if they can sign the authorization for the recording afterwards or even tomorrow. Most importantly, that you do that before leaving. So I will ask to Francesco Barreca to come here and Florian.
Yes, maybe it is my pleasure also to introduce Francesco Barreca, who is an historian of science, specializing in medieval and early modern scientific knowledge, with a focus on the relationships between science and religion, the Galilean tradition, and the historiography of science. He holds the PhD from the University of Pisa and has held research positions at the University of Florence and Milan. A long-time collaborator of the Museo Galileo in Florence, he is also the author of the Italian Genius on Display, and served on the editorial board of Galileana. And his talk is entitled Philosophizing with Ends, Patronage Seeking, Theory Evaluation, and Popularization of Knowledge in Johannes Kepler. Thank you very much, Francesco.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Maddalena and Florian, for having me today. And then I want to apologize to you all since at the end of the session I have to excuse myself as I have to leave. I have to attend another conference in Napoli, and so I won't be able to join you for the next sessions. However, back to business. Today I'm going to talk about Kepler, and specifically of his idea of philosophizing with ends, because this is something I've been working on for some time as a side business, let's say, so to speak, since I've been often struck while reading Kepler by the physical nature of the language he uses and by his frequent appeals to physical models. I think that this love for analogies and this fascination with automata reveals a worldview in which theory and making are joined together, and in which wooden spheres, paper models, and mechanical events act as an extension of the mind. Okay, so when I speak of philosophizing with ends in relation to Kepler, I draw on a phrase he reportedly used about his close friend William Schickard. Kepler called him a philosophus amphidexteros, a philosopher with two right hands. Now, Schickard was officially a professor of Hebrew, but he was in reality a true polymath. You can see this, for example, from the variety of objects that he considered for his portrait. You can see compasses or globes, paint brushes, and more, and obviously the Hebrew part of his teaching. He finally settled on this portable tellurium. I think it's a tellurium of his own invention, which expressed, I think he expressed his interest in everything mechanical and clock making. And you can see here, this on my right, it's an early example of a mechanical calculator. And I think this is the thing that Schickard today is most known of. Kepler admired this combination of scholarship and craftsmanship. To his eyes, Schickard could move easily between theory and construction, and for Kepler, this showed a mode of intellectual work in which making and thinking strengthened one another. I think this was also due to the fact that, as we will see, Kepler was not very skillful. And so he lacked a man like Schickard. We also need to mention that, unfortunately for Schickard, who was promised the teaching of astronomy in Tübingen, Michael Maestlin, Kepler's teacher, lived a very long life and happy life, so he never made it to the post. To better grasp what Kepler meant, I think we need to start from his love for analogies. And he gave to analogies a central role in his research. And this feature has long attracted scholars, even outside the history of science. For example, psychologist Deirdre Gentner has written extensively on Kepler's analogy between light and the vis matrix, using it to explore how creative thinking shapes scientific imaginations in general. As you can read here, for Kepler, analogies help to reach the essence of a question, and he thought that this can happen in two ways. The first way is to reveal through abstraction a general hidden principle. For example, here in this work, the Nives Hexangula, Kepler links honeycombs, pomegranates, snowflakes, and the geometry of a hexagon to discuss the facultas formatrix. through which God impressed the world-building forms into matter. The second way is the opposite, that is to move from a general principle, usually hidden, to a physical model. Here you see in the optics, Kepler explains why light bends toward the perpendicular when entering a denser medium by comparing it to a balance scale. I want to point out that this is a comparison between, not between the real object, but between two diagrams. In this regard, scholar Arianna Borrelli has spoken about thinking with objects, and in this case, diagrams are like paper tool. Kepler's writing a field, a literal field, with analogies, and some are essential to his research, and he carried on and on for years. Here are some of the most important for his work, and in some case, this analogy it can become so attached to an analogy that it's difficult to distinguish if it's really still an analogy. For example, this is the case of magnetism. Magnetism does not say that from the sun emanates something like magnetism. He speaks about some magnetic-like thing. So in going on and on with this analogy, at some point you need another analogy to explain the analogy. And this is the analogy with the robot in a circle river in the Astronomia Nova. We can think of a second-order analogy. In this analogy, compares the sun magnetic force to a robot in a circular river. So it is, to me, it is no wonder that Kepler appreciated so much Schickard and these manual skills, because Schickard could literally turn analogies into actual material objects. This for Kepler meant that a man like Schickard could reproduce on a smaller scale what God actually did. For example, here in the Harmonices Mundi, Kepler says that human-made musical harmonies are nothing but imitation of the universal harmony created by God. So given this basis, Kepler's fascination with physical models becomes more clear. Actually, clockwork mechanisms seem to have inspired the Mysterium Cosmographicum itself. And physical models were, for him, the perfect analogies. By making them, humans reproduced God's creative act on a smaller scale. And because models were visible, material version of abstract principles, they were also excellent tools for teaching and spreading knowledge. Kepler distinguishes two kinds of object for this purpose. I need to remind you that I'm talking all about models and the automata. I'm not talking about the instrument like a telescope or a quadrant. The first one are simple models, which are made of wood, metal, paper, or other materials, and they present astronomical hypotheses before the eyes, instruct the unskilled and the beginners, and lighten the labor of computation. The second and most important kind of models are the automata celestia. These are made for the amusement of noble and wealthy people. They imitate the events, and are also useful for teaching and researching. This is, I think, a crucial point. So here is probably the most famous image, one of the most famous images in the history of science. You used it for the conference. Comes from the Mysterium Cosmographicum. We often forget that it is a drawing of a physical model. of what appears to be a model. And to me, this image is almost bags to be built. It represents something, the bags to be built. As an evidence of that, let's see that this was designed by Christoph Liebfried, was a jurist, a composer, an astronomy lover. And in the same year that Mysterium Cosmographicum was published, Liebfried designed this elaborate astronomical compendium, which was made in Heilbronn by Goldsmith and Anton Linden. So Kepler never tried to build this model himself. And the reason, I guess, is quite simple. He did not want a simple model. He wanted an automaton, because as beautiful and as precise this model can be, there is no movement. So, okay, proportions of the cosmos are important, but you have to represent also the movement and the harmony. So he did not want to build a model like this. He wanted to build an automaton, something that could show the motion of the heavens, demonstrate his theory, and entertain noble patterns. In this case, Friedrich von Württemberg, because at the time Kepler was in Graz, he hoped to be that a working model of the cosmos will bring him support from Friedrich and help him get back to Tübingen. So Kepler began to design a drinking cup shaped according to the internal proportion of the cosmos, and it's called a Credenzbecher. Here you see the only thing that Kepler produced beside some representation of the mechanism is a sectional view, is the cup as seen from above. At the end of the presentation, we will see a reconstruction, a virtual reconstruction made at the University of Milan. But this cup was meant as a gift for Friedrich's Wunderkammer, and was a large shell with inner compartments corresponding to the planets, and each holding a different beverage. As historian Noam Andrews explains, this was an extremely complex project, hugely expensive and risky. Kepler himself was not skilled either in drawing or in practical design. He never got beyond a simple paper model, and in the ultimate, the project was abandoned. He blamed always the goldsmith, but that we know today that is not the case. Even his master, Mestlin, at some point decided that Kepler's project couldn't be done. But Kepler did not give up the idea of creating a working model of the universe. And this desire grew stronger after he met Schickard in the 1620s. Schickard could truly make this thing happen. And so Kepler shared with him the idea of a planetarium, and Schickard prepared a preliminary sketch together with some sketches of the mechanism of the clockwork behind it. Yet also this plan failed because Kepler was overwhelmed with other obligations like finding a secure post of teaching or the witchcraft trial which involved this model. And Schickard had this trouble too, to find a better position in Tübingen. To me, however, the key point is that this concept, Philosophensein with hands, sits at the crossroads of a courtly culture, persuasion, and scientific inquiry. This kind of objects were created for the court, but Kepler wanted them to be more than beautiful artifacts. He wanted them to represent the true structure of the cosmos, and he is clear about this in the letter to Friedrich. An instrument to demonstrate my invention, that is what he had discovered in the Mysterium Cosmographicum, and at the same time to show the first and the second motion. So here you see you want to represent movement with this automata. So the better the model, the more persuasive the theory. And this was a genuine, I think, philosophical concern. So seeking patronage did not weaken the search for truth. Quite the contrary, it reinforced it. For Kepler, scaling the cosmos through automata carried deep theological meaning. When he presents the credence Becker to Friedrich, he says that God reveals himself not only in the traditional two books, that is, Scripture and nature, but also in human works. To scale the cosmos, so, is to join in God's work, imitating his reasoning and his procedures. And in this imitation, humans may glimpse the truth. So let's recollect what we said. First of all, in the idea of philosophy sanguinens, we have scientific invention as a social currency. This is well documented in the literature. Artifacts were valued, collected, exchanged, and scholars like Lisa Jardine, Adam Mosley, Linda Levy-Peck, and Lisa Skog show that focusing only on patronage is too narrow. We have an example of this in this very collection here at the museum. So we must consider the wider material, intellectual, economic context. The second point is mechanical realizability as a criterion of truth. I think this is central in Kepler because he speaks about a literal proof by construction. You can make it, you can prove that your theory is true. Analogies on paper can help, but material analogies are stronger because they engage both mind and hand, just as God engaged both in creation. For Kepler, God's creation is not all an intellectual enterprise, not just with the mind, it's a physical act. We will see this in a moment. Finally, we have scientific communication as a visual and tactile activity. For Kepler, the popularization of knowledge often becomes a performance, connected both to culture and to proof by doing. For example, in the notes to the Somnium, Kepler describes how he usually staged this optical experiment in Prague as a performance, as if they were magical rites. And scholars like Sven Dupré have argued that this performative side deeply shaped Kepler's work in optics. These three dimensions are joined together, and I think they find the right convergence in Kepler's idea of play. This is an idea that has been long developed by Nick Jardine. And in Kepler, playfulness is essential to his approach to nature. It links together the works of God, the works of nature, and the works of human. So God created the world playfully. Nature plays a hide-and-seek game with us, and we humans, in turn, can join in the game. So this interdependence is so strong that it becomes hard to tell who imitates whom. In the Mysterium, in the Mysterium Cosmographicum, Kepler even suggests playfully that God might have taken inspiration from human creations when making the world. So that is, man imitates nature, nature imitates God, God imitates humans. And this idea implies that scaling the cosmos is both an imitation of God's creative act and a possible model for it. Thank you. Oh.
Thank you very much, Francesco. I'm gonna jump right now to the next talk. Please invite Ruth. So I'm going to introduce you with a few words. Ruth Voice is trained as an art historian at Harvard University and Johns Hopkins University and works on the visual, material, religious, and intellectual culture of Europe and its borderlands around between the 15th and the end of the 18th century. Their work has been supported by a number of grants and awards, most recently the Marie Slodowska-Curie AU Senior Research Fellow at the National Museum of Denmark. Following an international career, family circumstances brought them to settle in Estonia, where they are currently visiting lecturer at the Estonian Academy of Arts, author and editor of a number of books and articles. And can I mention one volume you co-edited recently, which is reassessing epistemic images in the early modern world, which is the one I get to know you. Dr. Voice's paper for this conference draws from a monograph under contract for the CNTI series from Amsterdam University Press, now Routledge, which is anticipated for 2026 or 27, we will see. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here, Florian and Maddalena, and it's good to be back in the Museo Galileo in the fall of 2014. I had a fellowship at the Niki up the hill beyond the Porta Romana there, and when I was there, I came here to visit the collections, and Giorgio Strano very generously let me study some astrolabes in the collection here, and the things that I learned during that visit, and even one of the photos that I took, became part of an article for the Art Bulletin, and that article in turn was kind of the first seed of this larger book project that I'll share a different part of it, different aspects of that with you today. Open with a quote. I have seen your Reverence's astrolabes, which you sent me on the 19th of October last year and the 18th of January this year, and indeed the invention pleased me. Only this inconvenience seems to attend it, that several instruments are required. I have observed that part of the heavens beyond the tropic very rarely comes into use. Therefore, I would prefer an ordinary universal astrolabe unless it must be used for cosmography. Otherwise, whether we use a universal astrolabe or your four-part astrolabe, I think they are little to be trusted because they have very few uses, and those are very uncertain, since on them not all circles can be described, nor the verticals and almocanters for every degree and minute, so that in most cases we are compelled to proceed by conjecture. This is the reason why I am not much delighted with instruments of this sort. I say this not to disapprove of your invention, but only that you may recognize the imperfection of instruments. If your superiors were to deal with our Reverend Father General so that you might be called to Rome, it would be most pleasing to me, for as I see, you have a talent most suited for mathematical studies, end quote, translated from the original Latin. And this is an excerpt from a longer letter from 1601 written by Christopher Clavius, head of the Reformed Mathematics Academy at the Jesuit Collegio Romano, who dispatched this letter to invite Odo van Malcott to journey south from the Spanish Netherlands and join him in the Papal City to pursue advanced mathematical studies. The summons constituted Clavius's reply to two identical gifts that Malcott had dispatched from Liège across the Alps in October, and then again 3 months later in January, two examples of a variation of a plane or planispheric astrolabe of the Jesuit's own invention, which he called the equinoctial astrolabe, composed of 4 principal parts, judging from Clavius's account here. Clavius, in his letter, disparaged the unnecessary complexity of Malcott's design and what he considered its relative inaccuracy, the latter being a problem of scale due to the object's relative size. Clavius admonished his acolyte to eschew love of such complicated instruments and return to simpler yet more precise things like the compass and rule that Clavius holds in his own 1606 portrait with his back turned to more intricate mathematical devices. There's surely an irony in Clavius's own professed indifference towards instruments, given that the Jesuit mathematician was so renowned for his penchant for such contraptions, that after his death in 1612, an instrument designer wrote that other hardworking makers of mathematical instruments, quote, will make much less money now given the death of Father Clavius, end quote. And we know that Clavius possessed an impressive personal collection of instruments that's only hinted at by his portrait. So these next few slides that accompany my introduction are going to give an overview of the principal printed editions of Malcot's astrolabe in Brussels in 1607 and printed again in Rome in 1610. And in using his equinoctial machine to appeal to a superior famed for his love of instruments, Malcot was doubtless aware that others within the Society of Jesus had transmitted from a distance either unsolicited solutions to celebrated mathematical problems or instruments in hopes of obtaining just an invitation to Rome. Indeed, the summons to Rome demonstrates that Clavius was, despite his own protests, impressed and intrigued by Malcot's instrument, whose applications in mapping the cosmos he gestured to in that brief aside, quote, "I would prefer an ordinary universal astrolabe unless it must be used for cosmography," end quote. The equinoctial astrolabe was invented, reiterated, engraved, and printed during the first decade of the 17th century between Rome and the Spanish Netherlands. It was the brainchild of this Brabantine astronomer-mathematician Otto van Malcot, who was born in 1572 in Brussels to a noble family, Van Malcot de Kessel, both well connected on his father's and his mother's side to the Spanish Habsburg imperial machine in the southern Netherlands. A Jesuit with ties to Galileo who moved between the Jesuit college in Rome, instrument workshops in Liège, and courtly circles in Brussels, Malcot observed sunspots and other cosmic phenomena with newly iterated telescopes, while at the same time developing and disseminating his astrolabe. And my paper today offers a kind of alternative account of the ascendancy of the Galilean telescope. It's like a retelling of an all too familiar narrative of Galileo and the telescope, but rewritten with new actors, from the shifted perspective of a kind of double biography of this largely unknown instrument and its inventor, here recontextualized against period notions of scale operative in printed cultures of knowledge. And along those lines, I'm going to be showing a lot of images today, most of them for not as long as I would like, but it's meant to give sort of a taste of a largely unknown topic and protagonist. And I'm aiming to offer here a kind of micro-historical account of the ways in which scale was historically situated and constructed. While the specimens of this equinoctial astrolabe, which Malcot first dispatched to Clavius, have been lost, the design was later recorded and disseminated multiple times, and I'll be showing you different examples of this, in print in the form of paper instruments published pseudonymously by Malcot, as I mentioned, in 1607 in Brussels in a small octavo booklet engraved by the Damery family of instrument makers, and then in 1610, showing you here, in a volume in quarto attributed to Valerian Regnard, which was in fact an alias of Malcot, with etched plates, perhaps probably made by the Jesuit himself. Both the 1607 and the 1610 fold-out plates, which I show you here, illustrate in miniature those four parts that Clavius alluded to for the tympana and the ratia, here in 1610 designated equinoctial hemispheric astrolabes. And they show left to right the boreal or northern hemisphere, the austral southern hemisphere, a double hemisphere projection labeled each hemisphere reduced into one, and a combined north-south configuration with the northern and southern hemispheres placed alternatively with the horizon curves aligned. The fact that the preface to that 1607 Brussels publication described how some years earlier Lambert d'Amery had engraved copper plates after Malcot's design and printed numerous paper specimens hints that the exemplars that he sent across the Alps to Clavius were also paper printed instruments. The equinoctial astrolabe originated in this kind of space between Italy and the Low Countries at an historical moment when the instrument culture of the scientific Counter-Reformation was shifting from astrolabe and mechanical instruments more broadly to telescopy and dioptical instruments. This shift and the crucial formative role that print played in it is visualized in this portrait of a contemporary of Malcott, the Jesuit Christoph Scheiner, where the same kinds of instruments featured in that earlier print of Clavius have here been joined and also somewhat displaced by a massive telescopic observation apparatus. The planispheric astrolabe, which here hangs on the back wall, posited the Earth as the immovable center of a two-dimensional model of the cosmos that materialized Ptolemaic geocentric cosmologies that were officially espoused by the Society of Jesus. By 1600, the limitations of above all, the conventional plane astrolabe's tympanum latitude plates, the stereographic projection, which is the two-dimensional rendering of the three-dimensional heavens projected from outside the celestial sphere onto a plane. This is a problem alluded to in Clavius's letter to Malcott, gave rise to innovations in European design on the basic object type, which should be considered not only or maybe even mainly as serving practical but also theoretical ends. And these different astrolabic reconfigurations of cosmography that remodeled the celestial sphere's relation to the terrestrial emerged contemporary to burgeoning cosmological theorizing. Otto van Malcott's planispheric variant, here in an etching in his 1610 publication circled in red, where it's compared to and also shown as the sort of evolutionary endpoint of other early modern designs, reformed the conventional stereographic projections on the rete or the starnet and the tympanum latitude plates. So formally speaking, the circle defining the circumference of the tympanum plate figured the equator, hence why it's called equinoctial, and thereby accommodated more scales than on a conventional astrolabe of equal dimensions, creating sufficient space on a tympanum of a large scale worked by the hand of an expert engraver for an exceptional resolution of 1 single degree and finer, and thus the potential for increased accuracy. Malcott had essentially presented Clavius with a heuristic apparatus with the potential applications for executing a range of celestial calculations for self-professed truthfulness and exactitude, which included computing something called parallax. Parallax, which I'll say more about momentarily, basically functions according to the elementary tenet that something seen from point A appears differently when you see it from point B. And it's demonstrated in this woodcut diagram by another Jesuit contemporary and a childhood friend of Malcott, the mathematician Francisco de Aguilon. And here in Aguilon's diagram, we see the target, the comet target F, marked by a yellow star, to observer A seems to be located at H in blue, whereas the same target to observer B appears to be located at point G in red, just to show this difference in perception. Now, in astronomy, parallax tracked the different perception of the apparent position of a single celestial target, like a star, observed from disparate viewpoints. While attempting to extend and resolve as never before the frontiers of terrestrial perception, Malcott's equinoctial astrolabe also materialized the limits of human discernment, sometimes quite literally, as we can see here in these minutely engraved prints with a diameter of about 27 centimeters that were made for celestial and terrestrial hemispheric maps printed from copper plates made for Malcott sometime around or after 1610 by another Brabantine instrument maker, Fernand Arsenius, who is son of the celebrated Louvain instrument maker, Gualteris Arsenius. And these were to be used with Malcott's equinoctial instrument. To Clavius, the arrival of Malcott's astrolabe in 1600 must have appeared particularly well-timed for several reasons. It came on the heels of the Jesuit professors' efforts to establish officially the Mathematics Academy and enhance the status of the discipline, which was hitherto subordinate to philosophy and theology, for cultivating advanced knowledge in the order, and recruiting aristocratic patronage in step with the society's global expansion. Malcott's invention also came in the wake of a confluence of terrestrial and celestial innovations, including comets and novae, that triggered something of a kind of space race across and amongst different confessions and institutions that demanded an accelerated observational technology, in return necessitating more precise instrument culture to cultivate a kind of a fantasy of utility and of trustworthy calculations. And here's where Clavius's aside in his letter about cosmography becomes especially important. As the professor of mathematics remained skeptical of both the trustworthiness of the cosmographical data offered by telescopes and the philosophical cosmological implications of this data, which were beyond the purview of mathematicians within the Jesuit institutional and epistemological hierarchy. From 1602, Malcott was in Rome as a special student of mathematics in Clavius's academy. The following year, he was professor of mathematics at the Collegio, together with Christoph Greenberger, and then in 1604, extraordinary professor of mathematics. Following the detection in October 1604 of a supernova, Malcott delivered on the 23rd of December a widely attended discourse at the Jesuit College entitled A Problem Concerning New Stars, and it was complemented by the distribution of these small prints, which I'm showing you here, from just a single copy conserved in the Biblioteca Nazionale in Rome, and they were distributed freely to the audience and meant to demonstrate, like Malcott's oration, that by using trigonometric parallax, and here I'll show you how the parallax is diagrammed in a detail from the same print, that it would show, contrary to Galileo's own contemporary arguments, actually a lack of what was called stellar parallax for this astral novelty, the new nova, which in turn located it in the firmament among the fixed stars. By 1608 or 09, Malcott was, after some years back in the Spanish Netherlands, once again in Rome, where he served as mathematics professor at the Collegio Romano. By 1610, he had received a personal gift of a telescope from a past student of his in Antwerp. So we know that he begins personally using a telescope around this time. And I think it's significant that he was a key figure in the Jesuit response to Galilean telescopic science, starting from the year 1610. And in 1611, together with Clavius, Greenberger, and Lembo, Malcott responded to Cardinal Bellarmino's letter addressed to the mathematicians of the Collegio Romano, requesting comment on the cosmological ramifications of Galileo's telescopic observations. So what Galileo is doing telescopically is always kind of the intellectual elephant in the room in Malcott's world, if you will. In May 1610, a festival was held in Galileo's honor at the Collegio Romano, and there Malcott again delivered an oration, this one titled The Starry Messenger of the Roman College, so clearly in reply to Galileo's own publication. And this oration also employed parallax to allude indirectly to provocative cosmologies, and also as a kind of discursive note of rapprochement between Jesuit and Galilean prerogatives, because Galileo is also pursuing parallax measurements at the same time. And so it's thus noteworthy that around the same time that the telescope becomes part of Malcott's own astronomical praxis, he is concurrently refining and promoting his astrolabe as a notional device for prosecuting cosmographical truth that could be reliably reiterated ad infinitum, potentially, by means of printing technologies, whereas around the same time the telescope, for reasons of credit and priority and other reasons too, remained notoriously hard to obtain, to duplicate, and to use. As I mentioned before, in 1610, Malcott published in Rome his second pseudonymic expose of his astrolabe instrument. And this book included, in addition to these diagrams, which I've already showed, of the principal astrolabe types of the day, and Malcott's own equinoctial versions, additionally included as many as 15 etched printed sheets, of which I'm just going to show you a few examples quickly here. And these were separate prints, and they survive today only kind of sparsely, and we might say haphazardly, at the back of certain copies of the book that are still found in the world today. And they were clearly meant to be cut and reassembled into some sort of teaching models of astrolabes of Frisius, Rojas, Stoeffler, and also Malcott. And the latter that Malcott designed for his own device was made for the latitude of Rome, specifically approximately 41 degrees. However, these small-scale supplementary prints, when cut and assembled, they result in pretty clumsy and poorly calibrated instruments that are too precise for actual use beyond the level of just introductory pedagogy. And I know because I've actually tried to make two-scale copies of them, cut them out, and then actually piece them together. So we might here speak of a kind of a blurring of the boundaries between models and instruments. Notably, the 1610 volume also included a newly modified variation on Malcott's astrolabe. It's something that he gave a new name. He called it equinoctial hemispheres. And this, or rather these instruments, were a kind of hybrid multi-contraption that actually merged Malcott's astrolabe design with those of Frisius, Rojas, and Stoeffler, and then added in boreal and austral, terrestrial, and celestial maps that were rendered from their respective poles. And it was a kind of like a meta-astrolabe, almost a sort of chimera that totaled over 18 components, and I'm showing you the small diagram of it here, that not including the matter or throne, and it was like 8 stereographic plates, 4 radia, 2 terrestrial and 2 celestial plates, the rule, and other kinds of bits and pieces. Seems to fly in the face of Clavius's early warning about not overdoing it in terms of instrumental complexity. But Malcott's preface to this book also promised forthcoming large-scale prints of this instrument that was outlined in the text. And he apparently made good on this promise because there are 2 large copper plates, 27 centimeters in diameter, for printing paper tympanum plates for a hemispheric astrolabe that were engraved around 1610 by Ferdinand Arsenius, and they credit Malcott as the instrument's inventor, and they survive today in Paris, and I'm showing you them here. They were surely made as some part of a larger suite of copper plates that were made to print paper specimens of Malcott's expanding equinoctial instrument, because a copy of his Roman volume that survives today in Zurich also includes 18 additional large-scale printed sheets that were made from these plates by Arsenius with identical dimensions to the Paris copper plates. And they correspond to the components of a newly reconfigured equinoctial hemisphere and boast a gradation of finer than 1 degree. And I've already shown you the sheets from that suite of prints for the terrestrial and the celestial hemispheres, and I'll just show you briefly here a few other sheets that were printed for the rete and the tympanum plate with a latitude of 45 degrees to be used with Malcott's equinoctial astrolabe design. So while publishing in Rome his evolving invention and issuing small-sized astrolabic prints with really no practical astronomical utility, they have a diameter of just 5 centimeters. Malcott was also having Arsenius in the southern Netherlands produce these larger scale imprints with a superior degree of exactitude that were made possible by Arsenius's own ultra-fine engraving manner. These prints, which were at once both large scale in terms of their overall dimensions and what they purport to represent, and minute scale in terms of their engraved linear manner, could potentially serve observational and computational ends. Perhaps more importantly, by means of print, they materialized and mobilized the notion of scale itself to project a promise of utility on in a global field of Jesuit science. This field, moreover, was expanding. These Paris plates that I showed you a moment ago are configured for the latitudes of 66.5 degrees and 75 degrees, which cites their postulated users at and beyond the Arctic Circle, respectively. These most extreme of austral and boreal coordinates only make sense when considered in light of the principles governing trigonometric 2-point parallax. All the parties that were investigating the celestial novelties that marked the skies in the early Seicento made recourse to the rule of truth provided by the doctrine of parallax, a scalar mechanism according to which a single target is seen from disparate viewpoints, as I said before. And as shown in this basic diagram, in astronomy, parallax could be used to determine the relative and actual positions of heavenly bodies with cosmographical ramifications. Although annual or stellar parallax could not be detected until the 19th century, it was thought in Malcott's own lifetime by, among others, Galileo, that discovering proof of parallax with the instruments available at that time, in the case of stars, could be possible, and that the detection of stellar parallax, according to Galileo, could confirm the Earth's movement and thereby Copernicanism. And on the other hand, geocentrists like Clavius posited that a star's lack of discernible parallax would instead firmly locate it to the furthest regions of the cosmos. And prior to telescopy as a means for investigating parallax, this trigonometric parallax, which is essentially triangulation, the basic method used to measure parallactic phenomena with mechanical instruments, was best achieved by two observers located at two vantage points as far apart as possible, simultaneously observing one target, as shown in this sketch in a letter to Galileo. Subsequent computations combining the target's perceived positions from these two widely separated points could result mathematically in the actual distance to the target. So the equinoctial astrolabe's north-south configuration would have made it seemingly ideal for staging measurement making on a global scale, bootstrapping the expanding Jesuit networks for the purposes of reforming and performing parallax computations. And we can just imagine for a moment that two observers could be given identical printed copies of Malcott's astrolabe. They could be dispatched to the far reaches of the northern and southern hemispheres, where they would use the device to position themselves and record observations around a common celestial target. The resulting data, in light of the device's enhanced accuracy, could have presented as optimally choreographed according to a kind of performance of credibility made by an essentially automated scientific community. And by way of conclusion, I want to sort of weigh all these considerations, in particular of the potential practical scientific utility of Malcott's astrolabe designs against their possible theoretical, discursive, and propagandistic cultural ends. So the equinoctial astrolabe, as we've seen, came onto the Roman scene just at a time when the papacy, above all through the global Inquisition and the society's missionary activities, began to realize something approaching a global temporal order. And this ambition is instantiated as a function of instrument and print culture through some of the engraved illustrations in the 1640 Antwerp publication Image of the First Century of the Society of Jesus, or Imago, which I show you here. The fact that Malcott's astrolabe included the southern hemispheric constellations surely imbued it theoretically and ideologically in an era when the Jesuits were exploring the southern hemisphere, promising the order's potential to function as an enormously powerful scientific instrument in both hemispheres. Malcott, before dying at the age of 43 in Rome in May 1615, just prior to the Vatican's condemnation of Copernicanism, pushed his own astrolabic device to its theoretical limit and beyond the actual geospatial limitations of its potential operators. Rather than an appeal to practice and mathematical utility, we might then comprehend his astrolabe's evolution as a kind of hypothetical intellectual fantasy for how that early modern space race might be won, whether in conjunction or in competition with the telescope, whose institutional and epistemological primacy were not yet clear during Malcott's own short lifetime. This plate in the Imago, which I show you here on the left, with its combination of puto, mask, and telescopic trumpet, seemingly gestures to Galileo's own 1613 engraved portrait that accompanied his publication on sunspots, so that these allusions to telescopes here coexist with visual references to astrolabes across the pages of the Imago. For here, example, the globes approximate the astrolabe tympanum plates. So Malcott's instrument pretended an epistemology of scale whereby knowledge either conquers distance or is constituted by having travel data travel unchanged across and through space and time, from peripheries to centers of calculation and out again as publications. The imprint was situated at the fulcrum of these operations by way of the scalar concept of parallax as an essential means for the accurate generation of knowledge. Prints, by virtue of their relative distance and indexical relationships to their prototypes, reified in miniature the manufacture of knowledge of the true form of the cosmos through distance-based partial perceptions. But the astrolabe's ever-changing design, as I've tried to very briefly gesture to here, its oscillating, shifting displacements from one author and one maker and one physical location to another, its eventual division and multiplication into a multitude of instruments eclipsed into a single contraption, in some its kind of fugitive character, instead ontologized a scalar epistemology that is operating not so much in accordance with how a knowledge claim travels from A to B, but rather how the transaction made possible by the fact that A and B are distant from each other allow for the production of such knowledge claims. Yet this progression of fractures, personifications, transmutations, and multiplications was presented by Malcott as a series of successively clarifying parallactic relocations. Each subsequent reiteration of Malcott's astrolabe was presented as if social, intellectual, and temporal distance had allowed for a natural change in viewpoint, which in turn afforded a clearer vision of a constant pre-existing target, but what was in fact a target in a perpetual process of becoming. And this sort of absconding scalar epistemology subverted Print's promised accuracy and fixity, revealing instead its agency in masking, disguising, and displacing. Just as we think we at last clearly see and comprehend Malcott and his astrolabe, we realize that we don't. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth, for your talk. I'm going to ask Francesco also to join us for the discussion, and we really want to thank both of you because your talks led us to speak about models, instruments, and in order to scaling the cosmos more accurately, I would say, which is something of a urge in the 17th century. So that was a very interesting point. I don't know if there is a question in the audience first with Gunther. The microphone is on its way.
Thank you. I have two questions. First to Francesco. What is the source for the circular diagram of the Kredenzbecher of Kepler? Is it part of the Kepler estate?
It's enclosed in the letter that he sent to Duke Friedrich.
I see. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. And to Ruth, well, what is known about the Arabic predecessors of Malcott's astrolabes? There is, of course, an Arabic variant called the melon-shaped astrolabes, among others. Is anything known about Arabic connection?
I think Zimmer suggests a connection. Zimmer, in his volume on instruments, I can get you the reference. I want to say it's Zimmer who mentions that there could be a connection, or at least that there is precedent, right, for this approach to the astrolabe design. For amongst the sort of sparse letters that we have that survive from Malcott, there's no mention of it, and in his publications he makes no mention of it. So did he know of it? It's absolutely possible, right? And he's minimizing the precedence for all kinds of reasons, confessional, religious, but also priority and credit. So there's no explicit connection that's ever made, but it could be.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for these two great papers.
I have a question first for Francesco, which is a bit general. I found it the idea of mechanical realizability as a way to demonstrate truth, a very fascinating idea. And I'm wondering if it could have raised an issue for Kepler. I'm thinking about a different context, like a few decades later, where the idea of inventing a machine was not just about imagining the machine, having it in his mind, but really being able to make it properly, to make it functional. And I'm wondering, as you stressed, that Kepler has little mechanical knowledge or how-to knowledge, if there is a potential issue in that in terms of, or if it's just something that didn't matter at this.
Yes, it is not that Kepler had little mechanical knowledge. He had little mechanical skills, manual skills. It's not about the knowledge, it's about the skills.
Yeah, sure.
But yes, it was a potential issue for him. In the process of preparing the Kredensbecker, at some point he thought that his calculation, his astronomical calculation, were wrong, and that was the reason he couldn't have a goldsmith make the Kredensbecker as he wanted it. So there is potential issues in Kepler about this, the non-realizability. Is a potential threat to the theory? Yes, it is.
Thank you very much. And to Ruth, I have a question regarding the copper plates that you showed, which I'm wondering, I mean, there are no in the Musée des Arts et Métiers. Did you know something about do you know something about the provenance? I mean, how usually it's melted, this kind of, I mean, so it's already
I wrote
precious.
to them. They have no information, unfortunately. It is strange. 2 out of 18 surviving. It's clear that there are 2 states of the print, but other than that, after writing to the curators there, they didn't have provenance information that they could share. Yeah.
So, but there are only 2 of
there
the
are only
18.
2 that survive of an original 18.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's more a curiosity, probably, that's something that was kept for print, because the other parts would have been missing anyway. So
Yes, you know, perhaps those 2 plates survived because they were engraved with the Arsenius name. That's one option. Perhaps as a curiosity, because the latitudes are so extreme, they were sort of a curiosity. But there are all kinds of other accidents, right, of history that could explain it. Yeah.
thank you.
This one is for Francesco Barreca. I was intrigued by the tellurium in the hand of Schickard. You can trace the origin of such an instrument in the frontispiece of the Dialogo by Galileo in Lyon in 1540. My question is, are there other intermediate representations of such an instrument? Because in this case, the tellurium is mechanical with geared wheels, but the first one in the hand of Copernicus in the frontispiece, and then in other effigies of Copernicus, is not a mechanical object, it's just a demonstrative fixed object. Are you aware of other representations of such an instrument, intermediate? And what is the date of this portrait?
The date is in the early 1630s, just right before, some years before Schickard's death. But in Schickard's manuscripts, we don't have the representation of the actual instrument. We have the representation of the mechanism separate. I don't know this exact species. I didn't trace it back to his precedents. It was for the cyanide, I think, or at least Schickard used it for eclipses. And so in his manuscript, it is documented, and it is documented not starting from a previous iconography, but it seems to me that is mostly a mechanical problem. she has had this attitude to turn mathematical problems into mechanical problems. This is a way of reasoning for him. And so it starts in the manuscript, it starts with the simple gearing and then goes on to make this. Even when he announces to Kepler that he is creating a mechanical calculator, he says, the things you do mathematically, algebraically, I don't know how to say speaking, I can do them mechanically. So this is, I think, he turned every problem into a mechanical problem. So I think the main issue for him was this one.
Thank you.
Just a comment that this is actually something that physicists keep doing. Richard Feynman, famously told students that if they are able to represent some complicated phenomena with simple mechanical or electromagnetic analogs, they haven't understood the problem. And we are also very intent to try to make some practical representation of what we're doing to help communicate with the public. So, I mean, this frame of thought is actually not lost today.
Yes, about this, I initially at the beginning, I planned to start the presentation with a quote from Muschenbroek. It was later on, and he said, "The true philosophy is what you can do with your own hands." He was talking about experimenting, but I think it captured well what you are saying.
Yeah, maybe to follow up on that remark, I have a question for Ruth about the diagram of 1604 and the use of a print for the demonstration for a public audience. So do you know similar cases of that use, and can you tell us about this?
Yes, there's a fairly recent monograph, I want to say 2020, by Michael John Gorman called The Scientific Counter-Revolution, all about Jesuit scientific mathematical culture in this period, and it becomes more and more common at these events staged at the Jesuit College in Rome for the defense of student theses, but also for these mathematical orations that were given both by students and by some of the sort of Jesuit faculty, if you will, to distribute prints. And they grow increasingly complex. Mateusz Greuter is actually an engraver who's also engraving for Galileo during this time, and he engraves a lot of these prints. But the small scale one, like I showed today, which really literally fits in the palm of your hand. It's meant to be taken home in your pocket, right, and consulted or put into a notebook or something. The closest approximations, and I think the predecessors for these, we might call like epistemic handheld prints, are devotional prints that are being distributed in the previous decade, in the last years of the 16th century, to promote the sanctity of the founders of the Jesuit order. And so I think at some point, someone in the Jesuit college, right, had this idea to distribute these epistemic or scientific prints, essentially with the same ends as we saw in a paper earlier today, right, that the image might be imprinted, right, quite physically, but also in the memory of the observer. And this was a teaching resource, but also, to use propaganda, not in a disparaging term, but meant to. They would be. I don't know how many were made for these mathematical prints, but if we look at how many are being distributed in the terms of for the devotional prints, they're in the hundreds or even the thousands. So we could imagine, everyone who was anyone in Rome would have a small print that they would carry around. You could put it, compare it, that sort of thing. So, yeah.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, are there any other questions? No? Okay, so thank you very much to both Francesco and Ruth for their very interesting talks that led us in the core of tools and instruments, this part of the conference. So now there's a free lunch time, and we'll meet again here at 1:45 to resume. Okay?
Great.
Thanks.
Thanks.